And we're waiting. We're waiting. We're waiting. And there we are. Hello. Hello, my darlings. Welcome to all of you out there in wherever the heck it is that we are these days in quarantine land here in deepest California or any number of other things. Somebody quickly dropped me something or other just to let me know that you can see me and hear me at this point, because this is the first time it's ever gone on at 7 o'clock when it's supposed to. So just somebody just write me a quick message or something before I get too far into this, if you can see me, because otherwise I will have to start over again, I guess, or something like that. So in the interim, while I'm awaiting, there we go. We seem to be live. Okay. So that is a good thing. I will assume that everything is all right since I can see me on the other channel. And I welcome those of you who have not tuned in for one of these little Sunday night fireside chats before. And I welcome those of you who have come back again. And I send you my deepest sympathies that you should have to be spending your Sunday night with me instead of more interesting company. But such is life. Anyway, so I am apparently live. There we go. Okay, good. So I am indeed, in fact, live. And I just wanted to do a few things before I started. And the first, of course, is to say hello, as I've been doing, to everybody, and tell you how happy I am that we can still do this and that I have somehow managed to turn on the live okay, yeah, so I've somehow managed to turn on the live thing. I shouldn't have this many problems with it every night, but apparently, for some reason, I'm still easily confused. It's not a boomer thing, I swear to God, it's not a boomer thing. It's a confusing technology thing, and, that's just how it's going to be in the future. So, anyway, here we are. It is Easter Sunday for those of you who celebrate, and for whom this is an important holiday. I say Happy Easter to you. For those of you who don't, I say, well, what the heck did you do today? Did you just sit around all day eating hoarded chocolate eggs and it's not even your religious holiday? Yeah, that's pretty much me too. Anyway, so what I would like to do is to read a story, and then I will actually probably have time to answer some of the questions that I got last time, and will do so. But as I said, before that, I'm going to read. This story needs, I don't know if it needs explanation, but it is another one of my pastiches, in a sense. Pastiche meaning an imitation of somebody else's well-known style, although all my pastiches, I hope, are loving and kind ones, because they're usually based on writers that I really love. This story is no different. This is a story called Omnitron, What Ho! And the thing you have to know, it will just sound strange to you if you do not know this, but it is basically it is a P.G. Wodehouse type story. P.G. Wodehouse is one of those people who, if you are like me and you grew up reading his fiction long before you ever heard anybody pronounce the name, you thought his name was Wodehouse because it's spelled Wodehouse. But in fact, later in life, just as my other good friend Corey found out when he grew up that chaos, Chaos, is not pronounced chouse, and various other things that we all find out as we go along, we readers. P.G. Wodehouse is actually pronounced Woodhouse. Anyway, he is one of the greatest comic writers of the last several hundred years, certainly one of the greatest comic writers of the 20th century, and a huge favorite of mine ever since I was young. For those of you who do not know his work so well, you may have seen bits and pieces of Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry doing their version of his famous characters, Bertie Wooster and Jeeves, the imperturbable, unflappable butler without compare. And Bertie, of course, is a gormless young man with dubious smarts and a very carefully protected income that he does not have very good access to. And these were written in the 1920s. They're wonderful stories. Woodhouse is a genius with similes and analogies. Anyway, so I do not pretend to be P.G. Woodhouse, but that is what sparked the story in my mind. Now, I'm reading from this, which is called The Very Best of Tad Williams, and frankly, although it is a very fine book, published by Tachyon Press, it is not the very best of me, because there is no tap dancing by me, and anyone who knows me knows that it's my tap dancing that separates me from the common herd. A kind of a combination of Bill Bojangles Robinson, Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire, but with my own inimitable style and savoir-faire. So they didn't get any of my tap dancing in here, but they did manage to put a bunch of stories in here. Unlike most of my short stories, I'm pretty certain that I just wrote Omnitron What Ho for this anthology. I just went, oh, they're doing an anthology, I should add an original story, since most of these are being reprinted. So this was not something I wrote for any particular purpose, except just I wanted to write a story, and I wanted to write this one. So at this point, I will continue reading an actual story. Omnitron, What Ho? What's that, you say? You want to hear how I first met Omnitron, my robot servant, the admirable clanking Crichton who has saved my bacon more often than a pig herder with a Tommy gun. Very well, but I warn you, it is not a pretty tale. Like many grim things, it begins with an aunt. You all know what it is to have an aunt, I think. It is much like having a fish, and a cold one at that, if said fish had control of your finances and conceived you to be a complete waste of human tissue. And if there was anyone who was an authority on the subject of human tissue, it was my Aunt Jabitha, owing to her having lost most of hers. As usual, when she deigned to see me at all, I found Aunt Jabitha floating in her transparent vat in the day parlor, while all manner of supporting devices hissed and gurgled. The gimlet eyes of aunts are not made softer when couched in a disembodied head, floating in a very, very large jar, with only a kelp-like swirl of spinal cord and branching ganglia washing softly back and forth to keep them company. Downright eerie, some might call it, but we boosters are made of stern stuff. Werner von Second Stage Booster, she proclaimed by way of a greeting. You are a waste of human tissue. Of course. Aunt Jabitha, I think we established that fact in our earlier interviews. Every single one of them. Don't talk dribble to me, boy. We have a family emergency. You are being pressed into service. There is only one word more frightening to a booster than those dreadful two syllables, service. But in deference to those of tender feelings, I will not disclose that word at present. But I don't want to be of service to anybody, Auntie. And you've made a splendid start, because you are completely useless. Her head floated up to the front of the glass and bumped against it like a withered olive in an extremely unappetizing martini. But that's about to change. Your cousin, Budgerigar Scallop, is eloping with a young woman of very dubious parentage from some backwater outer rim planet. Her biology militates against her inclusion in this family. You will put a stop to it. But Aunt Jabitha, I said, hoping desperately to stall long enough for something on the order of a medium-large meteor strike to cripple civilization yet again and distract her, how could I possibly do that? Budgie never listens to me. Besides, I've been invited to a rather jolly costume ball at the Suborbital Drones Club. Hang your costume ball, and hang your cowardly piffle, Wernie, you worm. This is your chance to redeem the dreadful failure that has been your life so far. She floated higher in the tank so that she was looking down on me, rather like a child's balloon with the face of a gargoyle. The shuttle for the HMSS Chinless is leaving tonight from Luton Spaceport. Your cousin and his inamorata will be on board. So will you, because we have booked you a place. You will bring young Scallop back untethered, or you will throw yourself into the nearest star. Actually, no. If you fail, you must still come back and receive your punishment in person. She frowned. I may have other plans for you, even if you manage to botch this, as you have botched almost every other small favor I've asked you to do. Her confidence in me was so inspiring, I thought I might as well leave on this high note, and so rose to my feet. But it was not to be. You will be accompanied on this voyage by my butler, she said. At least then there will be some chance of everyone surviving your involvement. Omnitron, come in. What stepped from the shadows then was something like a man, but more like an espresso machine. It had the futuristic gleam that one associates with the hood ornaments of very fast hover cars, and an air of confidence not usually seen in the lower classes, especially the artificial ones. Omnitron, Aunt Jabitha said, this is my famously worthless nephew, Werner. Sir. It tilted its shiny chin ever so slightly toward its shiny chest. You will make sure he gets on the shuttle and then onto the Chinless, Omnitron. If he does not fulfill his duties, as I have detailed, you have my permission to twist off his ear. Ears are worth little. They can be grown on a saltine cracker these days. The robot bowed with a whir of well-oiled gears. As you wish, madame. Then he lifted me up and tucked me under his arm as easily as a padded matron might hoist a small dog dressed in an embarrassing sweater, and carried me out of Aunt Jabitha's parlor. Try to get things right for once, she called after me. Don't be a weed, boy. I wasn't sure what a weed was. Something that used to grow on the planetary surface, I suspect, before the big oh dear. And so my flashing riposte was delayed until after the lift door had closed behind us. See here, Omnitron, I said as I surveyed my cabin. This will never do. Old Budgie has a stateroom the size of Berkshire, but I seem to have been stowed in one of the laundry room dryers. I admit the room is not large, sir, said Omnitron, but it was the best that could be done with a last-minute booking. The ship was quite full. All that was available was third class. The purser, who seemed to have taken against me since my first cry of, "Yo-ho-ho, where's my bottle of rum?" as I walked up the gangway, surveyed me with cool disdain. Considering that he had those glowing red cybernetic eyes so many people are wearing these days, it was most unappealing. "Does sir have an objection to the accommodations?" he asked. "Oh, of course not," I replied, rapier-like. "Who could jolly well object to a stateroom the size of a face flannel? And where am I supposed to sleep?" The purser again fixed me with his smoldering gaze. He was a small, thin man, the kind who look as though they only enjoy themselves at funerals. "Ah, but sir misunderstands. There is a bed. It folds down thus." He fiddled with something on the wall and let down what I swear was a child's toy ironing board. It had a teeny tiny blanket and a pillow that had probably been stolen from a gerbil. "I'm afraid that those who wait until the last moment to book passage cannot blame the staff for their lack of choice, sir." "No," I said under my breath, "but I can blame the staff for being unpleasant, abominable, red-eyed swine." The purser, who had been about to leave, turned and squinted his glowing cyber eyes at me, which gave rather the impression that a couple of maraschino cherries had leaped out of a Manhattan glass and rolled into a deep ditch. "Beg pardon, sir?" "My master merely asked for some of that pleasant Andromedan red and white wine," Omnitron cut in. Quite deftly, I thought, for something that looked like a washing machine hammered into the shape of William Gladstone. This Omnitron fellow was nothing to sneeze at. "Mr. Booster likes to drink both sorts at the same time. Thank you for your help." "Humph," said the purser, and went about his business. "Thank you, Omnitron," I said. "Considering that you are a robot, you are still a vastly superior human being to that fellow. Did you see him sizing me up? You'd think I had snuck on board in a fishing net." "Quite, sir. A bad sort, no doubt. But now I think you had better put on your dress coat and make your way up to the Lido deck. Your cousin and his friend will be there." "No time for a little room service or a swift nap? That shuttle flight took it out of me, Omnitron. I had the vacuum hose to my mouth the whole time. Dashed bumpy." "I'm afraid not, sir. But I understand your aunt has provided you with the wherewithal for a couple of free drinks." "Say no more. It's booster into the breach. Lido on, Macduff." The scene on deck was quite cosmopolitan, with not only all manner of Earth quality present, but the wealthy and well-fed from many other colonies and alien cultures as well. In the midst of all those unfamiliar green and blue and occasionally downright startling faces, it took me no small time to locate Cousin Budgie, but at last I spotted his generous silhouette. Budgie is a well-fed sort himself, and his cummerbund bulged like a mainsail in a stiff breeze. "Hello, Booster," he said as I walked cautiously across the anti-gravity dance floor. "What brings you out here? Didn't think this was your sort of picnic, because it costs money and all." I scowled as pleasantly as I could at this unneeded reminder of my current financial inconveniences, namely my continued debt slavery to Aunt Jabitha and the collection agents of several well-known Fleet Street touts. "Cheers, Budgie, old sprat," I replied. "And who is this lovely young lady?" I almost didn't finish the sentence, because in point of fact his companion was indeed rather lovely. No, rather stunning, to be brutally precise. Black hair, raven's wing, that sort of thing, and a face like a Tanagra figurine, except less terracotta-ish, if you grasp what I mean. Clear, limpid eyes. Why do people say that, anyway? Weren't those a kind of shellfish ones? And a figure that, beneath her modest neckwear, would have made a tea-sipping vicar choke on his profiterole. "This," asked Budgie, "this lovely creature is my fiancée, Crelita Thoractia du Palp, from the planet Cunabulum. I suppose you ought to call her Crelly, like I do." He turned to the wondrous female creature next to him. "Say hello to Werney, Crelly, darling. He's a bit of a worn old sock, but he's good for some laughs." She greeted me demurely. Budgie went off to find more drinks. "And, how did you meet my cousin, hey?" I asked her. "House party? The huntsman's ball?" "His private cruiser crashed in the jungles of my home planet." I could hear the tiniest trace of an accent. "Ha!" I thought. "That proves she's a gold digger. She's foreign." "I nursed him back to health," Carlita explained, "and we became fond of each other. He is everything I ever wanted in a man. He is ideal." I watched Budgie coming back, doing a sort of clumsy samba to avoid spilling the 3 Scorpio slings he was carrying. It was hard to think of my pale, pudgy cousin as a man, let alone an ideal, but I supposed that on whatever backwater world Miss Dupalp came from, the pickings might be a bit on the slender side. "Yes," I said, deciding to get to work. "And he's coped so brilliantly with his illness." "Illness?" "Oh, nothing serious. In most cases it has run its course. The victim is dead long before he reaches the homicidal insanity stage." She gave me a startled look, but before I could elaborate, and believe me, I was prepared to elaborate. I'd spent the entire shuttle trip up to the Chinless thinking up things to tell her to frighten her off. Budgie reached us. "Oh," he said, "what a crush! Some bounder elbowed me right in the brisket, Werney. Can you imagine that?" He turned to his fiancée. "What do you say to a little whirl around the floor, my dove? They're just starting up with a Neptunian tango, and the gravity's turned way down low, the way you like it." "No, thank you, darling," Crelly said. "Though it does sound terribly romantic. You dance if you'd like. I'll watch." He shrugged and made his way off again in search of suitably bipedal partners, which were a bit thin on the deck tonight. "Brave, brave lad," I said, shaking my head in admiration. He's always put such a courageous face on things. Acts just like everyone else. Are you certain he has this illness? Curlita asked. Because, well, we have plans. She blushed prettily. We're going to have a family. Oh, I shouldn't worry about that, I said. I'm quite certain good old Budgie will be an excellent papa, until he gets to the screaming stage. Screaming stage? Oh, you know, when the pain of the disease becomes so great that the sufferer begins to screech continuously and tear off their own limbs and skin. Oh, same disease took Budgie's uncle, poor old fellow. They found the old man's bloody fingertips, and nails all over the National Library, but nothing else of him. Sad. Their first edition of Burke's Peerage was unusable afterward. They never could get the stains out. Oh, my, she said, those lovely clear eyes wide. Why didn't Budgie tell me this? Oh, I'm sure he wanted to spare you the worry, I said. Most sufferers shoot themselves long before most of the other things happen, so it seldom gets to that point. He was just looking out for your happiness. Querlita Dupalp's eyes now narrowed, precisely like those of any young Tootsie on the make who has just discovered that her golden goose is really a sitting duck, or something like that. To be honest, I've never really got the hang of metaphors. I looked up to see Budgie dancing with a long drink of champagne from the Proxima colonies. His partner was nearly 8 feet tall, so he was having trouble not treading on her feet. The trotters in question were about the size of my stateroom bed. Small for a bed, but perhaps a touch over-large for a young lady. Poor man, I said, sipping my drink and reaching behind Querlita to the buffet table, having orbed a sumptuous, steaming ham that was almost begging to become part of greater boosterdom. So brave, our Budgie, when he must already be losing control over his neuromusculature. Excuse me, sir. The familiar chill tone brought me up short. It was my nemesis, the purser, his little artificial eyes glowing with schadenfreude. The buffet is for first-class passengers only. Faced with this sudden assault on my person, I decided on a dignified retreat. I gave the attractive Miss Dupalp a conspiratorial wink, then took the ham and the Scorpio sling with me, leaving Budgie and his ladylove to their romantic destiny, into the spokes of which I hoped I had just rammed a jolly large stick. I may have taken a bit more ham than I should have, to be honest, but I hadn't had any breakfast owing to my shuttle-impaired stomach works, and my appetite was back. Still, I could barely get the entire ham into the lift down to third class, and had to ask an old limping woman to get out to make room. Phew, such a grumpy look she gave me. I thought these cruises were supposed to make people cheerful. You should have seen me, Omnitron, I told him. I was nothing short of magnificent. As soon as I mentioned Budgie's hideous illness, the young lady's attitude changed like a shot. I'll wager she can't wait to be shut of him now. His hideous illness, sir? As far as I know, young Lord Scallop suffers from nothing worse than a mild case of Venusian drip, which can be easily treated these days with proper medical care. I made it up. That's the genius part, Omnitron, old bucket. She'll never go near him now. Ah, I can hear her gnashing her teeth clear down here in the ship's underbelly. I suspect the sound you hear is me lowering your bed, Omnitron said, folding down the tiny handkerchief-sized platform with a squeaking, ratcheting noise like someone deboning a live rabbit. As I said before, some metal buffoon short-sheeted my commentary. I can hear her gnashing her teeth. Young Miss Dupalp is no doubt furious at having sunk her claws into such a sad, doomed specimen of earth manhood when she thought she'd bagged the prize. You say that as though she is not of earth herself, sir. I should say not. Not an earthly thing about her, except for her quite astonishing beauty and shapeliness, and her jolly nice legs. I've never run across the Dupalp family before, but I must admit they do rather sparkling work in the daughter department, her avaricious man-hunting notwithstanding. Did you say Dupalp, sir, as in the cunabulum Dupalps? Yes, Omnitron, I think that was her awful old planet, something like that. What of it? You have that cursed expression on your featureless face that I have already come to loathe, and your hydraulic tubes are practically rigid with disapproval. I'm sure you're mistaken, sir. Perhaps you should climb into bed. I will endeavor to hold it for you while you attempt it. The affair seems a bit flexible. Flexible? Ha! Impossible is the word Omnitron was too craven to utilize, but I will speak the truth and shame the chinless. After struggling for an hour to make myself comfortable on that slice of Melba toast they call the berth, I decamped to the floor, which, although not large enough for a proper game of blow football, let alone the nocturnal thrashing of a booster in his prime, was still much more spacious than the Procrustean saltine I'd been given to sleep on. Thus, when somebody knocked at my stateroom door shortly after 2 in the a.m. Earth time, I had only to crawl a few feet to find out who had so cruelly disturbed my slumbers. "Oh, dear Mr. Booster," said Quilita Dupalp, "please don't make me stand in the corridor. Someone might see me." Right. Can't have that. Although I couldn't imagine why. As far as I knew, these cruises were like a Feydeau farce, with various coves in their hard-mouthed mauls ducking in and out of each other's staterooms left and right. Still, perhaps back on Cunabulum, they were a modest bunch and didn't like to be seen dashing about in their, I had to admit, somewhat spectacularly filmy nightwear. Right-ho, I said when she was inside, which necessitated me speaking almost directly to her forehead, owing to the size of the room. Now, my dear, what can Werney do for you? A little counseling, perhaps? Are we having second thoughts about Lord Scallop? Oh, yes, Mr. Booster. Yes, you've opened my eyes. You've saved me from a hideous sham of a marriage. Well, shucks, ma'am, as our American cousins like to say. I was feeling quite proud of myself. Useless, Aunt Jabitha? Verney Booster? Useless? Way hey! I am sorry I have to be the bearer of such terrible tidings, dear lady. I only wanted to spare you any unnecessary heartbreak. Budgie would never survive the rigors of conjugal expression, she said. But you, Mr. Booster, you are perfect. Healthy as can be, and with a fine appetite. She leaned closer, which in those intimate confines actually caused her chin to press rather discomfortingly against my Adam's apple. Do you care for me, Werney? Just a little? I was nonplussed, as the French say, and my usually considerable aplomb was also slightly undercut by the very thick, musky-sweet scent Quilita was giving off. I could not help thinking of her shapely lower limbs and how much like springtime they had made me feel back on the Lido deck. Of course, I find you a very admirable woman, I began. Sensible, too, with your unwillingness to yoke yourself to a shambling, near corpse-like Cousin Budgie, but that is all I'm prepared to say at present. Kiss me, you romantic fool, she said, and then sort of attached her mouth to mine. Now, I don't want you to think your humble narrator is anything less than a man of the world, but I must confess I'd never thought kissing could be quite like that, sort of probing and, well, biting. At one point, as things were getting a bit too hot and heavy for my way of thinking, I actually felt something in my throat that seemed to be her tongue, except it was far too long and sort of scaly. It also seemed to be jointed. Here the Booster lexicon falters. Say now, I squeaked. What are you doing, Quilita? I mean, Miss Dupalp, of course, since we hardly know each other. I mean, my stateroom, middle of the night and all, you hardly dressed. I mean, isn't this a bit of a rum do? She laid a cool finger on my lips. "Oh, Wernie, you silly boy, it's all right. We'll be married soon, so there's nothing wrong with it." Even with the scaly, jointish, tongue-like thing no longer lapping at my uvula, I confess I choked and spluttered for a while. Do you remember how I explained that service was the second most feared word in the Booster Dictionary? Now I can reveal that the arch curse married is the Booster champion of champions, an utterance whose doomful sound turns women into grinning monsters itching to plan things, including the end of a fellow's freedom. Married? I finally managed to say. "Hold on there, dear lady. I think you have the wrong end of the stick." "I don't care," she said. "I'm sure it's a lovely stick, anyway. And I know I probably do things a bit differently than you. We're a bit of a backwater planet in some ways, but you will come to relish it." "Relish what?" I said, but she had turned from me, not that she could go very far in that doll's house of a cabin. "Don't look," she said, and began to undo the straps of her gown. "Turn around. Don't be so eager, you naughty boy." Well, perhaps we should slow down for a moment and take stock of things," I said. I mean, you're a lovely girl and all, but you see, I have a number of irons in the fire just now, and when you don't attend to them, well, you get frightfully hot irons, for one thing." "I knew it would be like this," she declared with the dreamy sound of a chubby schoolboy regarding a stolen eclair. "Both of us eager, panting for consummation, our breasts heaving with desire." Come now," I said, and reached out to grasp her shoulder despite its alarming nakedness, because I was thinking about shaking a little sense into her. If anybody's breast is heaving around here, it's not mine, Miss Dupalp. No, at the moment my breast is heaveless, positively torpid." "Don't look, darling, don't look yet," she said as she shucked off the rest of her outfit. "It's bad luck for you to see my final form before I'm ready." I was just wondering what kind of bridal trousseau a final form might be, and how I could escape from a cabin as small as this one without being noticed, when she turned and I saw her final form. It was not quite what I had expected. The skin and face and legs and complexion I had admired. In fact, pretty much everything that had pleased the Booster eye, and doubtless the scallop eye before me, now were revealed to be mere window dressing, on the order of an insect's chrysalis. Or is that some kind of fancy American hover car? Let's say cocoon instead. In any case, the aforementioned lovely skin cracked and peeled away in broad sheets before tumbling to the stateroom floor, discarded like a losing ticket at Epsom Downs, as Crelita Dupalp unveiled her true self in all its, well, dash it, in all its something. Something bad is what I want to say, like a giant sticky spider centipede sort of thing. As I stared in honest dismay, she lifted me up as though I were a kitten, and not one of your manlier kittens either, and flung me to the floor, then stood over me on her jointed legs, dripping long, ropey strings of something awful onto my face and chest. "Oh, Wernie, to think that you, the one to warn me of Budgie's unfitness, should turn out to be my true love after all." Crelita's compound eyes glittered with affection for yours truly. I was looking around for a house slipper to hit her with, but since it would have taken a slipper the size of a mail van, my search proved fruitless. "And you, Wernie, healthy, strong you? After I lay my eggs inside you, you'll provide such fine nourishment for our young when they begin to grow." A large tube-like object rose from her abdomen, a sort of garden hosepipe made of jointed plates. The hole on the end of it coming toward me was surrounded by spiky, toothy objects that looked meant to do some kind of serious harm, and I was fairly certain that your humble narrator was the intended victim. "Here now," I said, indignation struggling with mortal terror. No ovipositors, please. I'm British. Darling, love me, she cried. I think that's what she said, but her clicking, drooling mouthparts slightly impaired her speech. And then she clutched me with all her legs. I felt the tube beginning to nudge my stomach like a pickpocket searching for grandfather's gold watch. Help! I said quite loudly. Help! 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 Dash it all! Somebody help! In fact, I said it over and over and over and over, but nobody came. The clicking and drooling increased in intensity, and the toothy probe nibbled exploringly at my tum-tum. Things looked very bad for your humble, etc. You who? Called a strange voice from the open door of my stateroom. The most horrible thing I had ever seen was already squatting on top of me, preparing to introduce me to the joys of involuntary fatherhood, but the weird blobby shape in the doorway was a close second. It was lumpy and misshapen, had glowing red eyes, and was waving its limbs around in a manner only slightly less frenzied than Miss Dupalp, who had the advantage of having more of them to wave. Hey, sweet cheeks, the strange apparition said in a curiously metallic voice. Why don't you lose that gink and get with a real man? Who are you? Demanded Krillita. While she was distracted, I took the opportunity of buttoning my hired tuxedo over my exposed underpinnings. Just the man of your dreams, that's all. The thing in the doorway wiggled from side to side like a worm impaled on a dull fishhook. Healthy, fat, full of protein, and anxious to settle down and raise a whole brood of larvae. For a moment, Krillita hesitated. But then she rose off me, the joints of her legs creaking like an ancient dumbwaiter. You do smell good, she said. Fatty, meaty. Kiss me, you fool, said the lumpy red-eyed thing. We were meant for each other. Leave that poor, pale, scrawny, inbred weasel, and come to me, my exoskeletal sweetheart. Let me spirit you away to a place where our love will not be disturbed by search parties or worried relatives. Somewhere we can raise our young to crawl proudly toward the future. That did it. With a sound that was halfway between the joyous whoop of a red Indian and the slurping noise of a toothless man finishing his soup, Krillita Dupalp leaped across the room and fastened herself to the stranger, drool flying like confetti. As the two of them fell to the passage floor outside, the door of my stateroom clicked shut, and I was alone again. Nearly half an hour later, somebody knocked on my cabin door. I didn't answer, since I had folded up the bed and was sharing the alcove in the wall with it, hoping to remain there until the chinless docked, but I heard the door open and close. Master Werney? Someone called. To my great joy, I recognized the tinny tones. Omnitron? I managed to get the bed cupboard open and tumbled out onto the floor. What are you doing here? Did you see what happened? That woman was, well, she was a creature, Omnitron. A hideous man-destroying creature. Yes, sir. The fairer sex can be difficult at the best of times. What do you mean, difficult? She was going to scoop out my insides and fill them with some kind of caviar. And not the nice, yummy kind, I dare say. It was going to be baby food for a very unwanted group of offspring. I was going to be baby food for a very unwanted group of offspring. I know, sir, which was why I took the liberty of luring Miss Dupalp away from you. I gasped. That was you in the doorway, then? That red-eyed thing? Not exactly, sir. Omnitron had a look of great complacency on its face. At least, that's what I assume it was, a face. It's hard to tell with robots. You see, I knew that a young woman like that would not give up a prospect like you for a lifeless array of metal components like myself. So I took the liberty of knocking the ship's purser on the head. He was sneaking around in the hallway outside, trying to catch you with Miss Dupalp in your room. Then I manipulated his limbs and spoke as though I were him to draw her away. You coshed the purser? Thumped him on the dome and knocked him out cold? Good Lord, Omnitron, you are a hardened villain. I am an omnitronic butler, sir. I am programmed to respond usefully in most situations. Well, that explains the red eyes. Those horrid, superior, glowing peepers of his will haunt my dreams, although not quite to the degree that Miss Dupalp will. I shuddered. But the shape I saw in the doorway was quite stout, Omnitron. I recall that purser as being rather slender. After I had rendered him senseless, sir, I stuffed his clothing with leftover ham from your breakfast. You really took quite a bit, sir, I must say. There was enough remaining to nearly double his weight, which made him appear to be exactly the sort of mate Miss Dupalp was seeking. Omnitron, you are a pearl among machines. But what about when the arachnid lady finds out her liaison was begun on false, if still quite meaty, pretenses? What then? I took an additional liberty, sir, of flushing them both out the airlock while they were engaged in their romantic conversation. The erstwhile couple are frozen now, floating in airless space. Good God! Well, I can't say she didn't have it coming, but what about the purser? He was a nasty bit of work, true, but he was just doing his job, in an unpleasant sort of way. I dare say, sir, that he would prefer being frozen to the kind of fatherhood that was planned for him. I understand the young of Cunabulum are slow eaters, and it takes their victims many months to die. You know about those creatures? I have run across references to them in my light reading, sir. Omnitron helped me to my feet and began straightening the stateroom. I believe there was a pictorial in the Sunday Times. The Dupalps are an old and well-known Cunabulumian family. As soon as you told me her name, I knew you were in danger. I thought about it for a moment. Well, I have definitely had a near brush today with jolly old extinction, Omnitron, and I learned two very important lessons as well. Yes? What are those, sir? First, that matrimony is for suckers. Second, that one should always have a faithful robotic servant handy on an interplanetary trip, because in space nobody can hear you scream. Oh, I rather think everybody on the ship could hear you scream, sir. Omnitron tugged loose the tiny coverlet I was still clutching in fear-cramped fingers and laid it out on the bed. In fact, you are shrieking like a little girl, quite piercing. Then, dash it, why didn't anybody help me? Well, sir, after all, this is third class. I must say, Werner, said Aunt Jabitha, I am surprised, no, shocked would be more accurate, to discover you didn't utterly botch this affair. In fact, you have almost done well. Your cousin Budgerigar is saved from a most unpleasant marriage, and you have scarcely broken anything I will have to pay for. There is the matter of several thousand credits worth of expensive Betelgeusian ham you filched, of course, which will come out of your allowance. Of course, I said glumly. The thing with aunts is one does not argue if one wants to keep receiving one's allowance, even the tiny remaining fragment thereof. Whatever you say, Auntie. And I think I shall leave Omnitron with you to keep you out of trouble. Now, that was a bit better. I could get used to being waited on by a stout machine like Omnitron, especially if it was going to prove useful in scraps like the one on the chinless. As you say, Auntie, he will in fact keep you company on your trip tomorrow to the spa on Indignation 9. Beg your pardon? Aunts have the habit of saying things that quite sneak past one's ears sometimes and don't reveal themselves in their true horror until they reach the old brain box. Spa? Is that meant to be a reward? It didn't seem like my idea of the thing at all, which would have been an increase in allowance. or at least Aunt Jabitha breaking out my late uncle's quite good brandy and offering me a snifter. Is it at least one of those sun and tennis places? No, you young idiot, it's a place to dry out. You're going to Indignation 9 for the cure. You drink too much, and you are endangering your liver and kidneys. I intend to use them one day. Beg pardon? Did you say use them? Goodness, yes. You don't think I keep a blithering fool like you around because I like your conversation, do you? Someday I will harvest your organs and use them for myself. She frowned at the vat that contained her. A person can grow tired living in a jar, you know. I haven't been able to beat a servant properly in centuries. And I want to go dancing again. I left Aunt Jabitha's house, accompanied by Omnitron. I was pensive, with the awful twin visions of bits of the inner booster being removed and of my aunt cutting a rug at the Duke of Buckingham's spring do. Well, I can't say I'm very happy about any of this, I said. Indignation 9 is supposed to be a famously dreadful place. They give you mineral water and rye toast, and nothing more, then laugh at one's distress. I've even heard ugly rumors of jumping jacks, Omnitron, sit-ups, calisthenics. Buck up, sir. Omnitron leaned over and plucked a piece of lint from my lapel with one of his metal claspers. At least you now have learned the falseness of your aunt's long-time allegations against you. That should be some comfort. What do you mean by that? Well, sir, she has made it very clear that, at least in the case of your kidneys and liver, she doesn't think you're a waste of human tissue after all. I considered that for a moment. By Jove, Omnitron, I said. You're right. Of course, sir. And that is the end of that story. So I hope you all put up with my Woodhouseian pastiche out there. And now I'm going to try and read some stuff. Not stuff, but some questions, because I had some questions that were sent in to me last week and we didn't have time, but we've got a good 10 minutes or so that I feel very comfortable using for different things. So here's one. Suzanne Owen wrote in to ask me a question which was blending discovery writing and outlining plotting. What to leave open, write first and then plot and go back to foreshadow, or plot from the start. So what Ms. Owen is asking is do you plan everything out ahead of time? Because you need to be able to set things up for the ending, especially of long books. And do it that way. So make sure you know everything that's going to happen in the story, or kind of go along and discover, and then go back and try to fix things. And in fact, it's a question I have been asked before, and there's not a single satisfying answer, but I will tell you what I can. And the reason there's not a single satisfying answer is because it's, again, one of these things where you have to find your own rhythm. You have to find your own way of doing things. For me personally, I have a problem a lot of writers don't have, which is that because I'm writing multi-volume stories, by the time I get to the last volume and I'm actually writing the ending of it, the first volume, or sometimes even 2 volumes, have often already been published. So my joke for many years as I was going out and doing readings and people would ask me about that kind of thing was, what am I going to do with the books I already wrote if I realized, oh my God, I should never have killed that guy off. I really need him at the end of the book, really the only alternative at that point is going, as I used to say, going door to door with a red pencil, borrowing people's books back. Let me fix that now. See where it says dead? No, I'm just going to put breathing very shallowly. But yeah, the point was it wasn't something that was really easy to do. So what I always do is a combination of both. I plan enough of the important things that have to happen before the ending that I at least have a structure, and that I can begin to foreshadow in the early volumes, even the very beginning of the first volume, I can foreshadow things that will pay off several volumes later because I've already figured them out, at least to some extent. Sometimes I haven't figured them out in detail. I just know in a general sense that character is going to do something at the end that will catch everyone by surprise, in which case I will put in significant foreshadowings that look like I'm keeping hidden what exactly they're foreshadowing. But in fact, I don't know. I really don't know what I'm foreshadowing at that point. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. But I have to make it look as though I do. So there's a certain amount of creative fudging involved in this process. But the other thing that is also peculiar to me is that when you're writing, you know, a 1,000,000-word story, basically, which, say, for instance, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, or the first Otherland book, or this new trilogy, the Last King of Osten-Ard trilogy, all came in at about 1,000,000 words. And as a result, that's like 10 regular short novels, like mystery novels or something. You know, that's a huge amount of stuff. So not only can you not figure out every single thing that's going to happen ahead of time, or it would take you years before you even started to write, but many of the things come out of the writing itself. Many of the twists and turns come as you're working. And lastly, because it's such a very long process, you don't really want to be just repeating things you've already planned out. You need to be able to come to the story every day with some things you don't know and say, well, I wonder what's going to happen with this character today. I wonder, these two seem like they're going to have an argument, but I don't know what it's about, you know? Or somebody's going to do something surprising here. They're going to leave in the middle, but who and why? And why does that seem like the right idea to me to have happen in this scene? So basically what I always liken it to is a tightrope act. You know, like you got one of those big, huge bars, right? And you try to walk that skinny tightrope and you try to balance the bar so that not too much weight goes to either side. You don't want to overbalance. So you don't want to know too much about what you're trying to write because then it's boring. And plus you can't think of it all ahead of time. But you don't want to know so little that when you're getting to the end of the story, you're writing stuff like, and then the guy that everybody thought was dead turned out not to have been dead. It was really funny because they all thought he was dead, and then he wasn't, and then he did something. You know, you don't want to do that either. So you want to walk that line back and forth. Wobbling the pole back and forth. So now that I've finished my little essay on pole wobbling, let's be very careful editing this for later. Let me see what else I've got. I have a question from David Spraga. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing it. David's name has the lovely and interesting spelling of S-B-R-A-G-A. Spraga. And he told me it's 2 syllables. So I want to make sure I'm not saying Sabraga, but I'm saying Spraga. Okay. Anyway, David asked me a semi-spoiler, but I don't think at 30 years in at this point it's going to give anything really tragic away. So David asks, in Otherland, City of Golden Shadow, which is the first book of the Otherland tetralogy, at what point does Paul Jonas undergo the Grail process? Before the foreword, during it, after? Question mark. And basically, no wonder that looks weird. Okay, basically, Paul Jonas is actually pretty much going, he goes through the Grail process long before the book starts. And that's kind of all I want to tell you because I don't want to give it away to people who might want to read the books because they're full of fun and strangeness. And in many ways, they're almost my favorite work because it's kind of the fullest expression of what I do because it's got action-adventure giant bugs, a living human breakfast, tiny yellow flying monkeys called the Wicked Tribe, all kinds of things. The Trojan War is in it, 1930s Merry Melody cartoon that has been created to be an entire world where the kitchen comes to life at night. I mean, it's got all kinds of cool stuff in it. So I don't want to give it away and prevent anybody from reading it, but that's basically it though. So Paul, the thing you're talking about has actually happened to Paul before the story begins. And I hope that answers the question. If not, send me another question because I'll keep doing this and we'll do another one. Oh, he already did send me another question. That was quick. Also, does Paul undergo the Grail process because of something Mr. Sellers does, or is it because of the other? Yes. Paul is picked not so much for himself, but because he is potentially attractive to someone else who is also lost in the Grail system. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but that's why Paul has been picked, and he has been picked actually by Jongleur. But again, I'm confusing people who don't know the story. So sorry, people who don't know the story. Why haven't you read it? And another question. Todd Tracy, my old friend Todd, sent a question saying, without giving away any major plot points, tell us about one event or character in The Navigator's Children that might surprise us or that we should pay special attention to. Well, that's kind of giving away a major plot thing. But I would say instead, there are some of the characters not in The Navigator's Children or even in the first two books of the trilogy, but there are a couple of characters in The Heart of What Was Lost, which is the short novel that acted as a bridge between To Green Angel Tower and The Witchwood Crown. So that novel has a couple of characters in it who are seemingly just sort of part of the story along for the ride, but who will actually become quite significant in The Navigator's Children. And I can't tell you any more than that because, I'm just not going to. So there. Anyway, thank you, Todd. Another question. Leaf, or Life, or Leif, depending on what part of the world. Leif Madsen. What is the new world you see coming? As a fiction author, you are used to peering into realms of imagination. Apply that to our reality now and tell us what you see. Well, if we're talking about the current reality and, COVID-19 and all of that kind of thing, regretfully, my historical perspective is that we get very upset about things in the short term, but as soon as we can push them to the back of our minds and start thinking about important things again, like our next beer, or The Bachelor's new season, or whatever kind of, brain fluff that, keeps us occupied, we will move on. I hope that we will learn some lessons. Certainly, we are living in an era where pandemics are likely to continue happening because we have been making tougher viruses and tougher bacteria for a long time. I suspect that we, of course, have a lot to deal with global warming, which may cause problems for us as well, and climate change. There are certain places now already where the permafrost is thawing and weird organisms are beginning to appear. So that's another thing to consider. But basically, I'm still enough of an optimist that I think we're going to last for a while. I think we're going to get out into space and screw up a bunch of other planets as well as our own. I suspect that we will come up with solutions to most of these things. We'll probably wind up killing everybody who isn't hideously rich off, because who cares about poor people? And I am not one of the hideously rich, so I'm saying that nobody's going to be trying to save me except a bunch of other poor people. But I suspect that some of these things we will find cures for, but we must learn how to do the things we need to do instead of putting them off. Oh, the next generation will take care of that, or Jesus will come back and fix global warming, or, whatever it might be. That ain't going to happen. We have to do these things ourselves. We need to sacrifice some things because we have been a horribly, horribly wasteful society, and we need to invent our way out of some nasty corners that we painted ourselves into. So that's my suggestion. But I think basically we'll probably survive to pollute the cosmos. Yes. Okay, I've got a question from my good friend Jerry Unangst. And Jerry asks, do real life events ever affect your plots in any way? I assume you're talking about real life events other than the thing like Tad falls down, breaks his arm, or, Tad gets a brain-eating parasite and can't think, but still manages to complete his novel, because, what's a brain? No, real life events, absolutely, although I tend not to put them specifically into stories as models based exactly on that. What tends to happen is real life things spend several years kind of bumping around in my subconscious and then will creep into the stories, and sometimes I won't even realize it. Other times, it happens before the event happens. I put a rather horrible, unintentional, because it was before 9/11, 9/11 type scene in my book, The War of the Flowers. And as anybody who wants to can read the rather large author's note at the beginning of that, I decided ultimately to tone it down but to leave it in, because it was a genuine part of the plot and it happened before the attack on the World Trade Center. But it was a kind of creepy thing. But more often, these things do come in after the fact. And certainly world news. I've always been very big on politics and history. So things like that do show up in my work. They trickle through. Actual characters out of history and contemporary politics trickle through, but almost never directly. I very seldom say, oh, I'm going to write a story about that real life thing. And let me see if I think I've got one. Did I have one more question? Okay, and I've lost who sent it to me. I think. No. Yes, okay. This is from my friend in Yak, British Columbia, and I've lost the name. I made a mistake when I transferred it. Actually, I might be able to find out, since it'll probably be the last question I'll deal with tonight. And I like to get people's names. Okay. It's not work. Never mind. Okay. We'll go back to the normal stuff. Anyway, so here's the question. I will add your name on, dear reader, next time. I'm sorry I've lost it, but I've got a desk full of things open. It says, hi Tad, since you're soliciting questions, Abu is one of my favorite characters of all time. I would like to know more about how he was developed. Did you go to South Africa for research? Did you get to meet any Bushmen? Did you learn any more stories that might go into a future character? And actually, interestingly enough, one of the reasons that I always laugh at the various Shakespeare did not write Shakespeare arguments, suppositions, historical conspiracy documentaries, is because one of the reasons that people always offer for why Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare, which, by the way, I happen to consider is basically a class issue, because Shakespeare was working class. There are a lot of people who just do not believe that he could have had the education and the smarts. But, those of us who are more or less working middle class ourselves, we know there's an awful lot of smart, capable people who didn't happen to be part of the nobility or the rich folk. Not that there's anything wrong with rich folk, and if any of them are feeling guilty and want to send me a lot of money, I'll even say something nice about them. But and one of the reasons that people would often suggest that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare and that it must have been, De Vere or one of these other people, was because, he writes about Italy and he never went to Italy. It's a known fact about Shakespeare that he never went to Italy. Or, probably the island where the Tempest takes place either, or any number of places. This, of course, is complete, utter hooey, this idea that unless you write about something, unless you've been there, you can't write about something. It's just completely ridiculous. And Shakespeare doesn't even really write much about Italy when he does use Italy as a setting. There are very few kind of bits and pieces that you couldn't get from reading a book or talking to somebody who just got back. Similarly, and now here comes the confessional part, similarly, I have never been to South Africa. I apologize for that. I intended no slight to South Africa by writing about it without visiting it. However, at the time of my life, when I was writing the Otherland books, I was going through a painful and unpleasant time with a divorce and moving to another country and starting life with Deborah, my wife. And I just couldn't make it to South Africa. As a result, I used every resource that I could. Remember, this is pre-internet, or almost as much as pre-internet. I mean, we had email, and that was about it. But as a result, I did do a lot of things. I wrote to a lot of people. I wrote to Botswana and Namibia's departments that handled the Bushmen, San Bushmen, the remote area dwellers. They had a number of names. I explained a lot of this, including my own unwillingness to claim I really knew very much about those people in Otherland. Again, in another one of my author's notes. But I do have a good story to tell you. And on that note, I will probably finish up for tonight. But I do want you to hear this. Again, I'm doing another broadcast in 5 hours. Yeah, about 5 hours. 1 a.m. my time. It is now 8 o'clock my time. So some of my European friends who are up early on Monday morning can watch. And I'll read a different story. But it'll be recorded, so those of you who want a different story can get it here. Anyway, I was in the midst of writing the Otherland books, and a fairly significant portion of the books, at least in the beginning, takes place in South Africa, and specifically in two areas, in Durban, a big city in South Africa, and up in the Drakensberg Mountains. And I really just wanted a perspective scene. I wanted to, there's a long strip in Durban called the Golden Mile. And I wanted to describe that in a way that felt, very visually real. But at the time, as I said, there was almost no internet. I couldn't find any pictures in anything in the library of, anything that felt like enough of the Golden Mile that I could speculate what it might look like in 75 or 100 years or however long it was supposed to be until the Otherland books from the present, which was then late 80s, early 90s. So after trying and trying and trying to find somebody who could tell me what this piece of street looked like now, a big and important part of Durban, I finally started going through phone books. And I eventually found a phone book that I could use with a map and figured out a office building that was facing the right way on the Golden Mile, looked tall enough by the number of offices that it would have a good view and I could see it and, allow me to do what fiction writers do, which was to fake something that I could not actually get to myself. So I waited till it was the right time, it was business day time in Durban. And I started calling from, I think I was living in London at the time, in our little flat in Islington. And I started calling and didn't get any numbers, or I got answering machines and didn't want to leave 25 different messages on all the different answering machines. I just wanted somebody to tell me what they could see from their window. So I finally got this nice young woman. She sounded like a young woman, but this nice person on the phone, and she was trying to figure out what I was asking. And I was so excited to have a live person on the end of it. I probably didn't explain myself very well because I'd already been trying to reach people for a good hour and a half or something. And it's like, whatever the time it was in London, it was not, the middle of the day. It was weird time of night. So I'm saying to her, no, it's okay. Trust me. It's nothing. Just go to the window and look out and then tell me what you can see. And she's, very clearly on the other end of the phone, she's very hesitant. I keep saying, no, honestly, it's okay. I'm just calling you on the phone. Go to the window, and she says, the curtain's closed, or the drapes are closed, or whatever. Just open the curtains and look out across the street and tell me what you can see. And she's really adamant about not doing this and not quite getting me, but getting increasingly nervous. At the same time, she's not hanging up on me, thankfully. And so I'm getting more and more, no, please, just trust me, just do it. It's late. And I'm not explaining myself well at all. Anyway, I finally realized that in this woman's mind, she didn't register any of the stuff about I'm calling you from London or anything. She almost certainly thinks that when she opens those blinds, she is going to look out and see an office building across the street from her right there in Durban. And there's going to be this weird, bald, naked man standing in the window, probably doing some kind of obscene belly dance. And she is just very reluctant to go look and have to face that. And when I finally figured it out, I went, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I should have explained better, you know, and I started back and went slowly through the whole thing. She said, so you're not in SA, I think she said. You're not in SA. I said, no, I'm not. I'm in England. You couldn't see me with a telescope. This is nothing weird. I am not a flasher. I am a writer. Writers are weird, but not in the way you're worrying about, or at least not me. And at that point, she did go to the window, was relieved that she didn't see a weird naked man across the street, and proceeded to give me a description of that part of Durban. And then, of course, you know, reality being always weirder than fiction. After all that, I wound up scrapping that part of the book, and that scene never happened. So the whole bizarre conversation was for nothing. Ah, well, anyway. So, want to thank you all. I want to thank you all so much for coming to join me again. I will probably be doing this every Sunday at the same time as long as we're locked down, although I may run out of Tad stories to read at some point, at which point maybe I'll read some other people's stories. But again, for those who are interested, I will be reading a different story at 1 a.m. my time, so a little less than 5 hours from now. And those of you who would like to see it but don't want to stay up late or whatever, or are not in the right part of the world to see it right now, feel free to come and watch it on my Facebook page, which is always open to anybody to come and look at things, as far as I know. And if not, please tell me. So, with that thought, I want to wish you a very happy Easter and a good Sunday evening from my family and our house and our ridiculous collection of misfit toys that we call our animals and children. And hope that you are all well and stay that way, and do stay that way. And I'll talk to you real soon. Thank you very much.